Hello, and welcome to a new video from Christian Table Talk. Today we'll take a look at the Islamic Jizya. I'll try to answer the following questions in this video. Number 1, what is the Jizya and where does Islam command it? Number 2, did Muhammad implement the Jizya and is it meant for this day and age? Number 3, what are the types of Jizya? Number 4, who pays the Jizya? Number 5, how much is the Jizya? And number 6, what happens if someone doesn't pay the Jizya? Islamic apologists claim numerous things regarding the Jizya. As you have probably heard, Muslims try to claim that there is nothing wrong with paying the Jizya. They'll make claims like, it's just like Zakat. Zakat is what the Muslims pay. In this video, we will show if that's really the case. As usual, I won't make any claims without backing them up from Muslim sources. The links you will find in the description box. So, question 1, what is the Jizya and where does Islam command it? In short, it's extortion masquerading as a tax that is mandated on dhimmi subjects of the Islamic State. Okay, I'll simplify. What is a dhimmi? Many people pronounce it dhimmi, and it basically comes from the Arabic word dhimma, which roughly translates to pact. A more modern meaning would probably be responsibility, meaning that they all fall under the responsibility of the Muslims due to the pact of Jizya. The word Jizya originates from the Arabic word jaza, which roughly translates to compensation. We can understand what is meant by it in the way that it is defined in Volume 15, page 149 in the Encyclopaedia of Jurisprudence. Now, unfortunately, this source only appears in Arabic, but I'll translate it. It says here, Jizya is what is taken from the dhimmis. It is an amount that is contracted for the people of the book. It is derived from the word jaza, and it is considered compensation paid so he isn't killed. The most common form of jizya is a monetary tax that is levied on monotheistic non-Muslim subjects in an Islamic state, mainly Jews and Christians. The command to take jizya from them appears in chapter 9 of the Quran, verse 29. That reads as follows. Fight those who do not believe in Allah nor in the latter day, nor do they prohibit what Allah and His Messenger have prohibited, nor follow the religion of truth, out of those who have been given the book, until they pay the tax in acknowledgement of superiority and they are in a state of subjugation. Now, the verse is quite clear in its command. It tells Muslims to fight those who don't believe in Allah or Judgment Day, or even if they do believe these things, you still have to fight them if they don't prohibit what Allah and Muhammad have prohibited. The verse then says you must keep fighting those who are from the other Abrahamic faiths, who it refers to as the people of the book, until they are forced to pay a tax to recognize Islam's superiority and live in a state of subjugation and humiliation. But don't take my word for it here. Let's read what the major classical commentaries by Muslim scholars say. Here we have Ibn Kathir's exegesis of the verse, and like always, all these sources are from Muslim websites, and all links to these pages are in the description box, so you don't have to trust a single word I say. You can simply go check everything yourself. So what does he say? Paying jizya is a sign of kufr and disgrace. Kufr means disbelief. Allah said until they pay the jizya, if they do not choose to embrace Islam with willing submission in defeat and subservience and feel themselves subdued, disgraced, humiliated, and belittled. Therefore, Muslims are not allowed to honor the people of the dhimma. That's a term to describe those non-Muslims paying jizya in an Islamic state, or elevate them above Muslims, for they are miserable, disgraced, and humiliated. Sahih Muslim recorded from Abu Hurairah that the Prophet said, do not initiate the salam greeting to the Jews and Christians, and if you meet any of them in a road, force them into its narrowest alley. So the whole purpose of the jizya is to disgrace, humiliate, and belittle non-Muslims. These three words are key. They come hand in hand with the money that is offered with jizya. Another very well-respected commentary on the Quran is by Imam Tabari. He says the purpose of the jizya is this. It means they are giving money to the Muslims to save themselves from being beheaded. He goes on to interpret what is meant by the last words of the verse, often translated as subjected, humiliated, and belittled. It goes on to say what the Quran means by this term. It means defeated and humiliated. By humiliated, it describes them as despicable. Who else do we have? We have the interpretation of Al-Razi, another major exegete of the Quran. What is meant by belittled is that the jizya is taken from them in a state of belittlement, humiliation, and shame. The person must come to offer the jizya in person on foot, not riding an animal. He hands it to a person who is seated while he is standing. His beard is then grabbed and he is told to hand over the jizya, and once he pays it, he is pushed away by the scruff of the neck. This is what is meant by belittlement. Now, the jizya is not only in the Quran, it's also in the Hadith, classified authentic by the vast majority of Muslims, namely in Sahih Muslim, Book 19, Hadith 4294. It says, "When the Messenger of Allah appointed anyone as leader of an army or detachment, he would especially exhort him to fear Allah and to be good to the Muslims who were with him. And here he would list off the commandments of war. Further, he says this: if they refuse to accept Islam, demand from them the jizya. If they agree to pay, accept it from them and hold off your hands. If they refuse to pay the tax, seek Allah's help and fight them." Now moving on to our second question. Did Muhammad implement the jizya, and was it meant for his time only, or is it meant to be applicable in this day and age? Muhammad implemented a precursor to the jizya a year or two before it was officially mentioned in the Quran. If we read the Sirah, which is the Islamic biography of Muhammad, we open it up to page 515. It says, "The apostle besieged the people of Khaybar in their two forts, Al-Watih and Al-Sulaylim, until when they could hold out no longer, they asked him to let them go and spare their lives, and he did so. Now the apostle has taken possession of all their property, Al-Shaq, Nata, and Al-Katiba, and all their forts, except what appertained to these two. When the people of Fadik heard of what had happened, they sent to the apostle asking him to let them go and spare their lives, and they would leave him their property. And he did so. The one who acted as intermediary was Muhayyisa bin Masud, brother of bin Haratha. When the people of Khaybar surrendered on these conditions, they asked the apostle to employ them on the property with half share in the produce, saying, 'We know more about it than you, and we are better farmers.' The apostle agreed to this arrangement on the condition that if we wish to expel you, we will expel you. He made a similar arrangement with the men of Fadik." Now, a common Muslim apologist tactic when showing things like this is to deny the credibility of the source. In mainstream Islam, number one, the Quran is the most authentic source, followed closely by authentic hadiths, which is number two, and then followed by the biography of Muhammad, which is number three, the Sirah, the biography, which is also based on hadiths. This is despite the fact that the biography was compiled way before the hadiths were compiled and classified. But I don't want to linger too much on whether or not the level of credibility they give the hadiths is over the top in this video. I just want to point out quickly that Muhammad taking half of Khaybar's produce is also confirmed in the most authentic hadith collections of Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari. This authentic hadith in Sahih Bukhari, Volume 3, Book 39, Hadith 531, confirms that this deal with Khaybar took place. Narrated Ibn Ummar. Ummar expelled the Jews and the Christians from Hijaz. When Allah's messenger had conquered Khaybar, he wanted to expel the Jews from it, as the land became the property of Allah, his apostle, and the Muslims. Allah's messenger intended to expel the Jews, but they requested him to let them stay there on the condition that they would do the labor and get half of the fruits. Allah's messenger told them, "We will let you stay on thus conditions as long as we wish." So they, i.e. the Jews, kept on living there until Ummar forced them to go towards Tama and Ariha. And in case any apologist wants to claim that the people of Khaybar gave their properties to Muhammad as a present, this narration by Anas shows Khaybar was taken by force when the people at the town were completely caught off guard. In Sahih Muslim, Book 19, Hadith 4437, we read, "The Prophet of Allah rode through the streets of Khaybar, and I rode so close to him that my knee touched the thigh of the Prophet of Allah. The wrapper got inside of his thigh, and I could see its whiteness. When he entered the town, he said, 'God is great. Khaybar shall face destruction. When we descend in the city square of a people, it is a bad day for them who have been warned and have not taken heed.' He said these words thrice. The people of the town had just come out from their houses to go about their jobs. They said in surprise, 'Muhammad has come. We captured Khaybar by force.' The jizya was taken by Muslims under Muhammad at plenty of places where Muslims forced non-Muslims to pay up. We read the following in the 15th volume of the Encyclopaedia of Jurisprudence, page 154. The Messenger of Allah did not take the jizya from any one of the infidels before the verse of jizya was revealed. When it was revealed, he took it from the Christians of Najran, Zoroastrians of Hajar, referring to an area of Oman to Basra. Then he took it from the people of Ayla, and that's somewhere northwest of modern-day Saudi. Athur, near Syria, Athurat, that's near modern-day Amman in Jordan, and other places from Christian tribes who were living on the outskirts of the Arabian Peninsula. Some apologists may like to argue that the jizya was temporary and was not meant to be in operation in this day and age, and therefore ISIS reestablishing the jizya is completely wrong. But the problem with that claim is that it gets debunked immediately with just one authentic hadith that tells us jizya is set to be abolished by Jesus in his second coming. Let's go to Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 3, Book 43, Hadith 656. Allah's Messenger said, "The hour will not be established until the Son of Mary, i.e. Jesus, descends amongst you as a just ruler. He will break the cross, kill the pigs, and abolish the jizya tax. Money will be in abundance so that nobody will accept it as charitable gifts." Now, before moving on to more details on jizya, I need to explain a couple of things. There are basically four main schools of jurisprudence which determine Sharia law for Sunni Muslims. Shia Muslims belong to other schools of jurisprudence, but they don't differ that substantially. So I'll just focus on the Sunni ones in this video. I've mentioned them before in other videos, but I'll briefly mention them again. You have the Hanafi, Maliki, Hanbali, and Shafi'i. So with that in mind, what are the types of jizya? The most common form of jizya is called jizya sulhaya, conciliatory jizya, which roughly means conciliatory jizya in its form that's recognized by all Muslim schools of jurisprudence. However, the Malikis and Hanafis also recognize a second type of jizya called jizya anawiyya, which means forced jizya. It's a little misleading that they call it that since all jizya by its nature is forced. The difference between the two is very subtle. The standard jizya, jizya sulhaya, is a result of Muslims conquering non-Muslims and telling them to either become Muslim, pay the jizya, or the Muslim army will fight them. The forced jizya, the jizya anawiyya, is imposed on the non-Muslims who initially refused to pay a jizya and were attacked by the Muslims. On such occasions, most people would either be killed, enslaved, or ransomed, as they would be regarded as prisoners of war. But as I said, some scholars see forced jizya as an extra option after fighting non-Muslims. The forced jizya is imposed on the non-Muslims who initially refused to pay jizya and were attacked by the Muslims. Moving on now, who pays the jizya? In the most common form of jizya, the jizya sulhaya, you can get any non-Muslim from the Abrahamic religions to pay, including women and children, as long as that was part of the agreement set in place. Historically, it was placed upon men most at a time. In this type of jizya, you can also force people to pay their jizya individually or agree that a tribal community pays off the jizya collectively. In the other form of jizya, which is forced upon a conquered people after battle, only free, sane men and prepubescent teenage boys must pay. Women, children, those with blindness or terminal illness are exempt. It must also be enforced on individuals only, not collectively on groups. As for the religious groups, jizya is accepted from all four schools, are in agreement that it can be offered to Jews and Christians whether they were Arabs or not, as these two groups are considered people of the book, as the Quranic verse states. All four schools, generally speaking, also say taking jizya from Zoroastrians, whether they are Arabs or not, was fine because of hadiths that show Muhammad had taken jizya from them. Next, we have a religious group that is fairly small in the Middle East, and I know for sure that we have some of them in Iraq to this day. They are called the Mandeists. In Arabic, they are referred to as Sabians. The Hanafis, Hanbalis, and Malikis say this group can be spared death with the jizya, but the Shafi'is say they can only be offered jizya if Christians or Jews claim them to be part of their own group. As for all other religious groups, including polytheists, the Shafi'i and Hanbalis generally view that they aren't eligible for the jizya and don't really have an option besides converting to Islam or being killed. The Hanafis say jizya can be offered to polytheists too, as long as they are not Arabs. The majority opinion within the Maliki school of thought, however, says that jizya can be taken from anyone, including Arab polytheists. Moving on to our next question, how much is the jizya? Now, contrary to what some Islamic apologists may claim, the jizya in its most common form at least is completely undefined in value. It has no maximum value whatsoever. It is decided on a case-by-case basis by the local ruler within the Islamic Caliphate. It is not necessarily limited to money either. We already heard about the jizya-like deal with Khaybar that Muslims receive half their produce. In Volume 15, page 183 of the Encyclopaedia of Jurisprudence, we read the following example. The Prophet agreed with the people of Najran to pay with 2,000 garments, half delivered to the Muslims in the month of Safar and the rest in Rajab. It says further, Omar agreed with Bani Taglib that they pay double what Muslims pay as Zakat. You'll often hear Muslims say the jizya is just the same as paying the Zakat, which is 2.5% of their annual income. But it's clear from this alone that Omar forced some to pay double what Muslims pay as Zakat. The last common type of jizya does have an upper limit. However, bear in mind, at the time 3 dirhams was roughly what his shield cost. The limit for that particularly rare type of jizya was set to 48 dirhams for the upper class, 24 dirhams for the middle class, 12 dirhams for the lower class individuals. Now, this isn't a huge amount, but let's not forget that this is only set in the less common form of jizya. As mentioned, their much more common form, which is applied to all Sunni and Shia scholars of jurisprudence, has no upper limit. And finally, we're moving on to our final question. What happens if someone doesn't pay the jizya? Well, there are several ways to deal with non-Muslims who don't pay the jizya after agreeing to it to save their lives. We already had jizya being paid in clothing and money, but if these non-Muslims said they had no money to offer, what happened? Well, scholars mostly say you shouldn't try to make more than what they're capable of paying. But if we look at how one of Muhammad's well-known companions, Amir ibn al-Asi, the conqueror of Egypt, dealt with such a matter, we'll see how low the whole concept of jizya can get. If we read The Origins of the Islamic State, Volume 1, pages 353 through 354, we see the Muslim army had another way of taking payment for jizya from the poor Amazigh population living in Barca. which is now in northern eastern Libya, the Berbers of Lawata. Ammar ibn al-Asi made this a condition on the Berber inhabitants of Lawata at Barca. Ye have to sell your children and wives in order to pay the poll tax on you. So the Muslims here forced the Amazigh people, whom they called Berbers, to sell their own wives and children into slavery to pay for the jizya they couldn't afford. This isn't history written by the so-called infidels. This is a Muslim book documenting their own history. Imagine here if the roles were reversed. Imagine if Muslims in the Middle East were told that they either became Christians, be killed, or pay jizya in humiliation. Then we see some people too poor to pay the jizya, and they are ordered to sell their wives and children into slavery to generate them money for jizya. How would the Muslims feel about that? Would they make excuses and say that this is really kind and that jizya is fantastic? And imagine again, if we were to take the Al-Razi interpretation of how to implement it. Imagine if we dragged the Muslims by the beard when taking the money and then pushed them away by the scruff of the neck. How would they feel about that? So that's what happened to one group of people who couldn't afford to pay. Let's see what other punishments can occur to those who stop paying jizya. According to all four main schools of Sunni jurisprudence, a person who refuses to pay jizya can be killed or enslaved.
That is why when Muslims go and conquer the adjacent country, what do? We kill them all? No. The Prophet says, the first thing you do is call them to Islam. If they accept it, leave them. Khalas, they're Muslims. That is why when Muslims, if they refuse, then tell them Allah obliged upon you to pay taxation, jizya. If they refuse, then we have to fight. And if we fight you, then we capture you, you become our slaves, and we take your land, and you take because you refuse, I give you two good options.
وأنا أرجو أن الإنسان لا يخجل من دينه ويقول لا هذا قبل والإسلام لا يدعو إلى هذا. لا، كن قويا في دينك، أظهر دينك. نعم هذا ديني، نعم. الذي لا يرضى أن يعبد الله تبارك وتعالى فإنه يستعبد أو يدفع الجزية. وأنا أرجو أن
The majority of these subsects say that you can only punish the man, but the Malikis say that you can also enslave a man's wife and children. This is detailed on page 139 of volume 7 of the Islamic Encyclopaedia of Jurisprudence, in case anyone wants to look at that source. So in conclusion, we saw that jizya is ordered very clearly in the Quran and also mentioned in the Hadith. We saw that Muhammad implemented the jizya against numerous tribes and communities in Arabia during his lifetime. We saw that jizya continued to be imposed on new subjects after Muhammad's death. We saw that jizya is meant to continue until the second coming of the Messiah. We also saw that jizya orders the humiliation and belittlement of its subjects. We saw how some of the major commentaries of the Quran interpreted what constitutes this belittlement according to Islam's biggest scholars. We found out that jizya has a common form according to most schools of jurisprudence, but two of the Sunni schools in another type of jizya. We went into detail over who the jizya can be taken from and what beliefs these people must hold to be eligible to have their lives spared in return for jizya. We looked at the fact that there is no upper limit to the jizya whatsoever in its most common form. And finally, we found out what the penalties were for not paying the jizya, namely death or enslavement. That's all for this video. The links of the sources I used are in the description box as usual. I want to thank you for watching, and until the next video, God bless.